If you look at a map of the global economy, you don't really see factories or stock exchanges.
Right, you see supply lines.
Exactly. You see these massive invisible rivers of energy, and they're flowing across oceans, keeping the lights on, the servers humming, keeping all the trucks moving.
Yeah, the literal lifeblood of the modern world.
Right. But what happens if you trace those arteries back to their source? You'd think you'd find this, like, decentralized, robust web.
But you don't.
No, you find a terrifyingly fragile bottleneck. A single 34-mile stretch of sun-baked water right between the Arabian Peninsula and Iran.
The Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz. I mean, we live in this era of redundant cloud servers and resilient AI-optimized supply chains.
Yeah.
Yet the modern world essentially just tolerates a single geographical point of failure.
It really does. It's wild.
If the ships navigating this narrow corridor stop moving, the entire global engine just seizes. Manufacturing on the opposite side of the planet halts. The cost of your daily life skyrockets.
It's the ultimate paradox of modern geopolitics, honestly.
It begs a massive question for you as a listener. Like, how did the entire architecture of global prosperity end up hostage to the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, we're talking about a geographical feature that has dictated the grand strategy of empires for centuries, But its importance is actually accelerating right now in the 21st century.
Okay, let's unpack this, because
Right.
that acceleration is the absolute core of our deep dive today. We are going to dissect the physical reality of this choke point.
And the unimaginable volume of wealth trapped behind it.
Exactly. The decades of unresolved territorial disputes and the highly specialized, unconventional military strategies designed specifically to threaten and defend this waterway.
Right. And to do this properly, we really need to ground our analysis in the foundational sources.
Which we have. We're pulling from two incredible texts. First, we have the comprehensive historical and geographical framework from Ruhollah Ramazani's book, The Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz.
A classic.
Yeah. And then, to understand the actual mechanics of the power struggle, we're analyzing a landmark strategic report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS.
Right, the one authored by Anthony H. Gorsman.
Exactly. It's titled Iran, Oil, and the Strait of Hormuz.
And, the CSIS report is particularly fascinating because it was published back in 2007.
Which feels like a long time ago.
It does, but it wasn't merely assessing the tactical situation of the mid-2000s. It built these extensive parametric models projecting global energy demands, naval acquisitions, and regional power dynamics all the way out to the years 2020 and 2030.
So sitting here in 2026, we can actually look back and see how accurate those models were.
Exactly. Examining these deeply researched projections from the vantage point of the present offers an incredibly clear lens. It allows us to strip away the daily noise of the news cycle and see the underlying structural forces that govern the region.
It really cuts through the static.
It does, and it is crucial to establish our parameters here. We are examining these military models, historical grievances, and economic projections purely as analysts.
Right, no taking sides today.
Right. The goal is an impartial breakdown of the data and the geopolitical logic presented in the sources without endorsing any ideological or political positions.
Just the facts and the strategies. And to understand the logic of those strategies, you really have to start with the board itself.
A geography?
Right, because the geopolitics of the Middle East are entirely downstream from its brutal, unyielding geography. Before we can even begin to model a naval conflict or an economic blockade, we have to look at the physical dimensions of the basin.
Yeah, so the Persian or Arabian Gulf is essentially a massive, shallow inland sea. It runs for roughly 600 miles.
600 miles of coastline to defend.
Exactly. You have the massive landmass of Iran forming the entire northern and eastern coastline, while the Arabian Peninsula, which includes Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, and others, forms the southern and western boundary.
And it is an enormous repository of energy.
Massive. But the critical geographical flaw is that it is essentially a 600-mile-long cul-de-sac.
A cul-de-sac, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, there's only one exit to the open ocean and the global markets, and that is situated at the very southeastern tip.
Which is the strait itself. And as you travel down that 600-mile expanse, the coasts converge drastically. Right?
Very drastically.
The enclave of Oman juts upward, Iran dips southward, and the gap between them narrows to an absolute maximum width of just 34 miles.
34 miles.
I mean, 34 miles of open water sounds substantial if you were, zipping around in a speedboat.
Sure, yeah.
But the moment you look at the bathymetry, the underwater topography,
Hmm.
that 34-mile figure becomes a totally dangerous illusion.
Oh, absolutely. The navigable reality is a fraction of that width. The strait is notoriously shallow in places, and it's just littered with shoals and rocky outcroppings.
Which is terrifying when you think about the ships going through there.
Exactly. When you are moving the world's energy supply, you are relying on VLCCs, very large crude carriers.
These things are monsters.
They are. These are vessels that can exceed 1,000 feet in length and have massive drafts, meaning a significant portion of the ship sits deep underwater.
Right, so they can't just sail anywhere they want.
No, they cannot simply sail anywhere within that 34-mile cap. They are strictly restricted to deeply dredged, highly regulated shipping lanes.
Yeah, the sources outline a maritime highway system that honestly induces claustrophobia just thinking about it.
It's extremely tight.
You have this vital artery of global commerce squeezed into a 2-mile wide channel dedicated exclusively for inbound traffic entering the Gulf.
2 miles.
Just 2 miles. Then you have a separate 2-mile wide channel for outbound traffic vessels fully laden with millions of barrels of crude oil heading out to the Arabian Sea.
And what's in the middle?
That's the crazy part. Separating these two opposing flows of massive, slow-moving maritime behemoths is a buffer zone that is only 2 miles wide.
The physics of piloting a VLCC through those specific parameters is daunting. I mean, a fully loaded supertanker has immense momentum.
It's like driving a skyscraper.
Basically. It can take miles to come to a complete halt, and its turn radius is vast. Navigating a 2-mile lane requires absolute precision.
And they are executing this maneuver while hugging the jagged Iranian coastline.
Right. Passing within visual range of major naval bases, missile batteries, and disputed island chains, there is zero margin for navigational error, let alone hostile interference.
It's like threading a needle in a war zone. And I am looking at the sheer concentration of wealth locked inside this 600-mile geographical trap, and the numbers are staggering.
They really are.
The CSIS data details that the nations bordering this basin, so Bahrain, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, they collectively produce 30% of the world's oil.
30% just from that one area.
Right, but production is a daily metric. The true measure of geopolitical gravity is the reserves.
The potential energy.
Exactly. These countries sit on 57% of the entire globe's proven crude oil reserves.
Over half the world's oil.
That is 715 billion barrels of oil.
And if we isolate Iran's position within that matrix, their leverage becomes highly apparent.
Oh, totally.
The data shows Iran holds 11.1% of global oil reserves, which equates to roughly 132 billion barrels.
Just Iran alone.
Just Iran. Furthermore, energy paradigms are shifting heavily toward natural gas, and Iran commands 15.3% of the world's natural gas reserves,
Wow.
which translates to over 970 trillion cubic feet.
That's a number I can't even visualize.
It's immense. When you aggregate the entire Gulf region, it controls 45% of total proven world gas reserves. We are talking about nearly half of the planet's future energy security, completely sequestered in a single geological depression.
Okay, wait. Let's play out the logistics here. If I am an energy minister in Europe or Asia, and I know that 30% of global daily production is bottlenecked into a 2-mile outbound lane surrounded by potential hostilities,
You're sweating?
I am panicking. I am not accepting that risk. I'm looking for a massive overland detour. Why aren't these nations simply building continental pipeline networks to bypass the strait entirely?
It seems like the obvious solution.
All right, pipeline technology is mature. We build them everywhere. Why remain tethered to the maritime vulnerability?
Well, it is a question of scale and the physics of fluid transport. The report addresses the pipeline alternative directly and reveals that the detours are woefully insufficient.
Insufficient how?
Constructing and securing overland pipelines across hundreds of miles of harsh, arid terrain is incredibly capital-intensive, and they are highly vulnerable to sabotage.
True, a pipeline is an easy target.
But the primary issue is throughput capacity. The sources detail the east-west pipeline across Saudi Arabia, which terminates at the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea.
Okay, so that bypasses Hormuz.
It does, and that represents a significant engineering achievement, but its capacity is roughly 5 million barrels per day.
5 million.
The report also notes an Apekla-Yanbu natural gas liquids line and mentions initiatives by the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, to build a strategic pipeline through Oman to bypass the strait.
But 5 million barrels a day doesn't solve the structural math.
Not even close.
If the region is producing tens of millions of barrels daily, A 5 million barrel relief valve is just a fraction of the requirement.
Exactly.
It is the equivalent of trying to drain a massive reservoir through a garden hose. The vast majority of that crude physically cannot leave the basin unless it is loaded onto a ship and sailed right through the strait.
Precisely. The maritime infrastructure, the massive loading terminals, the huge tanker fleets, that is the only transport mechanism capable of handling the sheer volumetric output of the Gulf.
So we're stuck with the boats.
But we are. The global economy is irrevocably physically tethered to those 2-mile lanes. There is simply no viable, large-scale alternative to the seaborne route.
That physical tether dictates the entire economic reality of our world. Because the detours fail to handle the volume, we have to look at exactly how much of the global economy is floating past those rocks every single day.
We are literally looking at the global aorta.
The global aorta, I love that phrasing. The CSIS report quantified this flow, noting that roughly 40% of all world-traded oil transits through the Strait of Hormuz.
40%.
At the time the baseline data was established, that represented 17 million barrels per day.
17 million.
17 million barrels.
Yeah.
Every single day.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
And the destination of that oil reveals a massive geopolitical shift. The report breaks down the east-west split of these exports.
Right, where is it all going?
A significant volume traditionally moves west, navigating out of the Gulf, around the Arabian Peninsula, up the Red Sea, and either through the Suez Canal or the Sumed Pipeline to feed the energy markets of Europe and North America.
The historic route, yeah.
But the dominant, accelerating current of energy flows eastward. It heads directly toward the rapidly expanding industrial economies of Asia.
Specifically Japan, China, and India.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture.
This is where the strategic analysis introduces the vital concept of indirect dependence. This is a fundamental shift in how we have to understand global supply chains.
Okay, explain indirect dependence for the listener.
Well, a listener in the United States or Western Europe might look at their domestic energy portfolio, perhaps relying heavily on local production, Canadian imports, or North Sea oil.
Right, we hear a lot about energy independence.
Exactly. And they might conclude that the Middle East is no longer a critical vulnerability for their specific economy.
We drill our own oil, we're fine.
Right. But that assumes a nation's economy only runs on the gasoline in its cars.
Which is a huge misconception.
It completely ignores the manufacturing base of the modern world.
Exactly. The report emphasizes that Western economies are deeply integrated with Asian manufacturing.
Deeply.
The consumer goods, the electronics, the heavy machinery, the fundamental components that line the shelves and power the industries of the West, they are overwhelmingly manufactured in Asia.
And that Asian manufacturing base is overwhelmingly fueled by energy imported from the Persian Gulf.
Right, so an interruption in the Strait of Hormuz does not merely cause a localized fuel shortage in Tokyo or Beijing.
No, it triggers a massive, immediate contraction in industrial output, which instantly cascades into a critical supply chain crisis in Berlin, London, and New York.
That's the indirect dependence.
Yes, the West has outsourced its manufacturing, and in doing so, it has indirectly outsourced its energy security right back to the Strait of Hormuz.
That is a terrifying realization.
Yeah.
And that concept makes the long-term modeling in the CSIS report absolutely chilling. We aren't looking at a transition period where the world gradually weans itself off this choke point.
No, not at all.
The projections indicate the exact opposite. Utilizing data from the Energy Information Administration, the report tracked Gulf oil production from 23.7 million barrels per day in 2003, projecting a leap to 36.8 million barrels by 2020.
A huge jump.
And looking further out to the 2030 models, total world production was forecasted to hit 123.3 million barrels per day.
And within those 2030 global models, the volume of exports specifically exiting the Gulf was projected to increase from 22.5 million to 34.3 million barrels per day.
So the sheer volume of oil going through that 34-mile gap just keeps growing.
It does. But the most critical data point is the trajectory of those exports. The models projected the portion of Gulf exports destined for Asia would skyrocket from 24% to 58%.
Almost 60% of the world's most concentrated energy flow directed into the Asian industrial engine.
Exactly.
This completely reframes the strategic timeline. The narrative of technological advancement, renewables, domestic fracking, efficiency gains, it all suggests that geographical choke points should become less relevant over time.
That's the popular narrative, yeah.
But the raw data proves that the strategic gravity of the Persian Gulf actually intensifies. The volume of energy increases, the reliance of the Asian manufacturing sector deepens, and therefore the indirect dependence of the entire global system on that 34-mile gap becomes more profound with every passing decade.
Geography remains undefeated.
Always.
And when 40% of the world's traded energy must pass by a very specific jagged coastline, the barren rocks and tiny islands scattered along that route cease to be mere geological
They
features.
become priceless.
They become highly coveted strategic assets. The leverage afforded by controlling the overwatch of those shipping lanes explains the intense, seemingly disproportionate conflicts over minor territorial claims in the Gulf.
We have to dig into those flashpoints.
Yeah.
Because the diplomatic history of this region isn't just about oil rights. It is about the physical high ground overlooking the shipping lanes.
Right.
The CSIS report extensively details a deeply entrenched, decades-long dispute between Iran and the United Arab Emirates over 3 specific islands.
Abu Musa, Greater Tum, and Lesser Tum.
Yes. Somewhat unfamiliar with the tactical layout, fighting over these tiny islands seems totally irrational. They are basically just rocks.
They are small, yes.
But their proximity to the inbound and outbound traffic lanes makes them unsinkable aircraft carriers.
Unsinkable aircraft carriers. That is exactly how military planners view them. Their tactical value is immense.
Because you can put anything on them.
Placing a radar installation, a coastal defense cruise missile battery, or a forward operating base for fast attack craft on those islands fundamentally alters the balance of power in the strait.
You control the islands, you control the flow.
Precisely. And the historical context provided in the sources traces this specific conflict back to the geopolitical realignment of the early 1970s.
Like the British withdrawal.
Exactly. For over a century, the British Empire maintained a stabilizing, if imperial, naval presence in the Gulf. However, as the British formally withdrew their military forces from the region, a massive power vacuum emerged.
Nature hates a vacuum.
And so does geopolitics. The Shah of Iran, projecting regional dominance, immediately moved to seize control of Abu Musa and the 2 Tunb Islands.
And crucially, that territorial ambition did not evaporate with the 1979 Iranian Revolution.
No, the new regime embraced it.
The new Islamic Republic not only maintained the Shah's claim, but militarized it further. The report notes that by 1992, these islands were fully occupied by Iranian military forces.
It wasn't just a political claim anymore.
No, it was a physical fortress, establishing absolute dominion over the approach to the strait. By 1995, the Iranian Foreign Ministry escalated the rhetoric entirely, declaring the islands an inseparable part of Iran.
Which creates a perpetual diplomatic stalemate. The United Arab Emirates, backed by the Gulf Cooperation Council, has consistently sought to resolve this through international legal frameworks.
They just want to take it to court.
Right. The diplomatic record is a long list of rejected overtures. In 1996, the UAE and the GCC formally proposed submitting the sovereignty dispute to the International Court of Justice.
And Iran said no.
Iran refused. In December 2001, the GCC issued a definitive declaration stating their absolute support for the UAE sovereignty, declaring the Iranian claims null and void, and again pushing for ICJ arbitration.
And the cycle simply repeats itself. The report cites that in September 2006, the UAE once again offered international arbitration, and Iran once again explicitly rejected it.
Why would they accept?
Exactly. They hold the physical terrain, they understand its outsized strategic value for controlling the maritime choke point, and they simply will not subject that leverage to the ruling of a court in The Hague.
It ensures that a permanent tripwire remains stretched across the strait.
A tripwire that could ignite at any moment.
And those islands are merely one manifestation of the regional friction. The entire Gulf is a complex lattice of shared resources and contested boundaries.
Yeah, the sources highlight another massive structural tension. The dispute between Iran and Qatar over the North Field.
The gas field.
Right. This is a colossal geological formation holding the vast majority of Qatar's entire natural gas reserves. But the subterranean field crosses the maritime boundary straight into Iranian territory.
So you have 2 nations simultaneously drawing from the same immense, incredibly lucrative reservoir without a mutually agreed upon framework.
It's like 2 people drinking from the same milkshake with different straws.
That's a good analogy. The potential for resource-driven conflict is literally baked into the geology.
Furthermore, we cannot analyze these disputes in a vacuum of peacetime diplomacy. These border frictions exist within a region that has experienced catastrophic systemic warfare in very recent memory.
Yeah, we have to talk about the Iran-Iraq war.
Yes. The source text explicitly ground the modern strategic posture in the legacy of the Iran-Iraq War, which raged from 1980 to 1988.
A horrific conflict.
This wasn't a distant skirmish. It was a brutal, industrialized conflict that directly spilled into the shipping lanes. The so-called tanker war phase between 1987 and 1988 proved that the threat to the strait is not theoretical.
The tanker war is the operative historical precedent here. During that period, commercial shipping was actively and systematically targeted by both sides to cripple the other's economic lifeline.
They were just blowing up oil tankers.
Supertankers were struck by anti-ship missiles and crippled by naval mines. The situation deteriorated to the point where the United States Navy actually intervened to reflag and actively escort commercial vessels through the Gulf.
Which is a huge escalation.
The legacy of that era is a profound understanding among all regional actors that the maritime lanes are legitimate theaters of war. And this was immediately followed by the geopolitical earthquake of Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990 and the ensuing 1991 Gulf War.
So the baseline state of the Persian Gulf for the last half-century has been either active conflict or high-alert containment.
Precisely.
Add to that the profound ideological layer that the sources emphasize. This isn't purely a real politics struggle over hydrocarbons and island fortresses.
No, the report explicitly outlines the broader ideological friction between a Shiite-led Iran and the Sunni-dominated states of the Arabian Peninsula.
It's a massive theological divide.
The text notes that radical Sunni extremist movements actively deny the theological legitimacy of Shiite beliefs. This injects a volatile, zero-sum religious dimension into every territorial dispute and every military maneuver.
It makes everything so much more dangerous.
It creates a psychological environment where miscalculations are easily amplified and compromises are viewed as ideological capitulation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that synthesis of geographical constraint, massive economic stakes, historical bloodshed, and ideological fervor dictates the entire military architecture of the region.
That's why they fight the way they do.
Right. Because Iran understands it cannot achieve conventional maritime supremacy against the combined fleets of the United States and its regional allies. They can't go ship to ship.
No, they would lose that war instantly.
So they have engineered a highly specialized, unconventional military apparatus. They have constructed an asymmetric chessboard precisely tailored to the tight confines of the Strait of Hormuz.
Let's dissect that asymmetric doctrine. If you are a military planner in Tehran, and you know a U.S. carrier strike group possesses overwhelming air superiority and deep strike capabilities.
You don't build large, expensive destroyers that will be sunk in the first hour of a conflict.
Exactly. You build a force designed to inflict 1,000 tiny cuts. You leverage the shallow water, the rocky coastlines, and the sheer density of commercial traffic.
The foundation of this asymmetric strategy is intelligence and irregular operations, right?
Right. The report details the extensive role of the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, the MARE, often referred to as VEVEC.
VV.
According to the 2006 data in the text, VEVEC operated with a staggering 15,000 civilian staff.
15,000. That's an army of intelligence officers.
It is. And while they are tasked with domestic security and counterintelligence, their external mandate is deeply integrated into military strategy.
What do they do externally?
They orchestrate intelligence gathering, proxy network management, and unconventional operations throughout the Middle East. They provide the situational awareness necessary to deploy asymmetric assets effectively.
Okay, so when we look at the actual hardware executing this strategy, the maritime forces are divided into distinct layers of threat.
Let's start with the subsurface capability.
Right. The report outlines Iran's operation of 3 Russian-built Kilo-class submarines.
These are diesel-electric boats, not nuclear.
Which sounds like a downgrade, but it's actually not, is it?
In the deep ocean, a nuclear sub is supreme. But in the shallow, acoustically chaotic, highly saline waters of the Persian Gulf, a diesel-electric sub running on battery power is notoriously quiet and incredibly difficult to track.
It's practically invisible.
They are perfect platforms for laying minefields or executing torpedo ambushes against those slow-moving VLCCs navigating those rigid 2-mile lanes.
Mining is perhaps the most immediate asymmetric threat. The sources heavily emphasize Iran's widespread mine-laying capabilities.
It's their trump card.
We are not just talking about sophisticated more-to-influence mines, but also simple, free-floating contact mines.
Which are terrifying.
Releasing a barrage of free-floating mines into a powerful tidal choke point creates immediate, localized chaos, freezing commercial traffic as marine insurance premiums instantly evaporate.
Nobody wants to insure a ship sailing into a minefield.
Exactly. Then you have the surface form. The regular Navy operates roughly 140 light patrol and coastal combatants.
That's a lot of small boats.
The report specifically highlights 11 French-designed Kamin-class missile boats. These are small, fast, and armed with CSSN-4 or YJ-1 Sardine anti-ship missiles.
Let's break down the mechanics of the Sardine missile.
Please do.
This is a solid-fueled weapon with a range of 42 to 50 kilometers, carrying a 165-kilogram warhead.
That's a significant punch.
It is, but its primary defense mechanism is its flight profile. It is sea skimming. It flies mere feet above the crest of the waves.
So radar can't see it coming.
In the tight geography of the strait, a sea-skimming missile launched from a boat hiding against the radar clutter of the coastline gives a targeted vessel minimal warning time before impact.
And that conventional naval force is augmented by a massive, ideologically driven parallel military, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
The IRGC operates entirely differently.
The report notes the IRGC's naval branch commands 20,000 personnel, including 5,000 heavily armed Marines.
They operate their own sophisticated assets, including 10 Hudong-class missile boats armed with the much more capable C-802 anti-ship missile.
The C-802 extends their lethal reach significantly, boasting a range of 120 kilometers with active radar and inertial guidance systems.
But the threat isn't confined to the water. The geography of the northern coastline itself is weaponized.
The mountains.
The mountains and the caves, yes. The report details the deployment of heavy, land-based, mobile anti-ship missile batteries, specifically the Silkworm or Seersucker variants.
These possess ranges approaching 100 kilometers and carry massive warheads capable of breaking the keel of a supertanker.
And the tactical geniuses in their deployment. They utilize a shoot-and-scoot doctrine.
Tell me about shoot and scoot.
Because Iran controls the mountainous coastline, these batteries are mounted on mobile launchers. They are kept hidden deep within hardened bunkers or coastal cave complexes.
Like supervillain layers.
Essentially, yes. During a conflict, they roll out, fire a salvo of radar-homing missiles across the strait, and immediately retreat into the subterranean network before a retaliatory airstrike can lock onto their position.
That is incredibly hard to counter.
It is. And at the lowest, but perhaps most chaotic tier, you have the IRGC's fleet of Bogomars.
The speedboats.
These are essentially highly modified civilian speedboats armed with heavy machine guns, recoilless rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles.
In a traditional naval engagement, they are irrelevant. A destroyer would obliterate them.
True. But swarming a commercial tanker or launching a coordinated high-speed raid against the vulnerable multi-billion-dollar coastal desalination plants and power grids of the southern Gulf states, they become strategic weapons of terror and disruption.
I have to challenge a specific element of this threat assessment, though. The report lists all these hard assets, but it also wades into claims that border on science fiction.
You're talking about the 2006 announcements.
Yes. The text notes that in the spring of 2006, the Iranian military held massive exercises and claimed to have successfully tested a sonar-evading submarine-launched missile that no warship could detect or escape. They also touted a new Kausar missile, claiming it possessed an immense warhead, hypersonic speeds, and the ability to defeat all known radar and anti-missile defense networks.
The superweapons.
Right. From a purely technological standpoint, developing revolutionary, physics-defying weapons in isolation seems highly improbable. Are these claims representing a genuine shift in military technology, or is this a calculated disinformation campaign?
The CSIS analysis addresses this skepticism directly. The author clearly states that while new weapon systems were undoubtedly tested, Iran possesses a documented history of aggressively exaggerating its military capabilities and technological breakthroughs.
So it is a bluff.
Mostly, yes. The analytical consensus is that these grandiose announcements serve a dual psychological purpose.
Domestic and international.
Exactly. Domestically, they project an aura of invincibility and technological prowess to the Iranian public, bolstering the regime's legitimacy. Externally, they are designed to complicate the risk calculus of the United States and its allies.
So the exaggeration itself is a weapon.
Exactly. The report utilizes an incredibly insightful quote from an Israeli analyst, Uzi Rubin, to frame this strategy.
What did Rubin say?
Rubin argues that an objective analysis of Iran's military acquisitions reveals a fundamentally defensive mindset.
Defensive, with all those missiles.
Yes. The Iranian leadership understands that they cannot win a symmetrical conventional war of attrition against American air and naval power. Therefore, their entire strategic architecture is designed to deter an initial attack.
Ah, I see.
They aim to exploit what they perceive as Western psychological vulnerabilities, specifically an aversion to sustained casualties and economic chaos.
So they puff out their chest.
By projecting an image of an impenetrable high-casualty environment, they attempt to make the perceived cost of a preemptive strike or an intervention unbearably high. It is a doctrine of deterrence by intimidation.
That doctrine of intimidation relies heavily on ambiguity, which brings us to one of the most dangerous tactical realities outlined in the report, the deliberate blurring of the lines between civilian and military operations.
This is a nightmare for naval commanders.
Because a U.S. Navy commander has sophisticated radar that can easily track a destroyer, but the IRGC purposefully utilizes small, fiberglass or wooden vessels that look virtually identical to the thousands of local fishing dhows and small commercial traders that constantly crisscross the Gulf.
You can't tell who is who.
The text notes that during exercises, the IRGC practices utilizing these indistinguishable vessels for mine-laying operations or deploying covert raiding parties.
In a crowded, noisy maritime environment, a civilian fishing boat can instantly transform into a lethal threat.
It forces defensive navies into an impossible set of rules of engagement where they must constantly second-guess every blip on the radar.
It does. This complex matrix of subsurface threats, hidden coastal missile batteries, swarming fast boats, and psychological warfare is entirely focused on leveraging the geographic choke point.
Which forces us to confront the ultimate strategic question. Given this extensive, highly tailored asymmetric arsenal, could Iran actually execute a complete and sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz?
It is the nightmare scenario that drives global oil futures. But when the CSIS report runs the models and analyzes the hard data, the conclusion is surprisingly definitive.
What do they conclude?
The report states clearly that Iran could not successfully close the Gulf for more than a few days, perhaps a maximum of 2 weeks.
2 weeks maximum. That's a huge relief. But why?
The rationale behind that strict timeline is twofold. First, attempting a total blockade crosses the ultimate geopolitical red line.
It would bring the whole world down on them.
It would instantly unify the international community against them and invite an overwhelming asymmetric retaliation from the United States and allied forces. To maintain a blockade, Iran would have to expose its naval and coastal assets, which would be rapidly systematically dismantled by superior air power.
They'd lose all their toys.
But the second, more profound reason lies in the concept of mutually assured economic destruction.
This is a fascinating paradox within the Iranian economy. We established earlier that they sit on 132 billion barrels of oil. But the report highlights that years of chronic underinvestment, sanctions, and economic mismanagement have left their infrastructure severely compromised.
They are a massive exporter of crude oil, but they lack the domestic refining capacity to meet their own energy needs.
It's like starving in a grocery store because you don't know how to cook.
That's exactly it. Therefore, Iran is heavily reliant on importing refined petroleum products, like gasoline, to keep its own economy functioning. Furthermore, they are highly dependent on food imports to sustain their population.
And how do they generate the hard currency required to purchase that gasoline and food on the international market?
Solely through the export of their crude oil.
So if Iran mines the strait and halts commercial shipping, they trap their own oil.
They instantly sever their sole economic lifeline. Furthermore, any Allied retaliation would not be limited to sinking patrol boats. It would inevitably target Iran's highly centralized, vulnerable oil loading terminals like Karg Island and their few functioning domestic refineries.
A genuine attempt to close the strait would result in the rapid destruction of their own naval assets and the total collapse of their domestic economy.
The strategic cost vastly outweighs any conceivable benefit.
And the United States maintains a posture designed to guarantee that outcome. The report documents the overt signaling utilized by the U.S. military to reinforce this deterrence.
In late 2006 and early 2007, as tensions rose, the U.S. actively publicized preparations to counter any blockade.
They weren't hiding it.
Not at all. Information was deliberately leaked that naval planners were actively reviewing contingencies to blockade 2 major Iranian oil ports. They issued highly visible, prepared-to-deploy orders for specialized mine countermeasure vessels.
And didn't they send in the carriers?
By February of 2007, the U.S. had deployed a second complete aircraft carrier strike group into the Persian Gulf, with open discussions of deploying a third.
3 carriers. That is an insane amount of firepower.
This wasn't subtle diplomacy. It was the massing of overwhelming visible firepower to ensure the mutually assured destruction calculus remained perfectly clear in Tehran.
This raises an important question, though. Acknowledging that a total sustained closure is practically suicidal does not mean the asymmetric arsenal is useless. Right.
Not at all. The report pivotally notes that an absolute blockade is not required to inflict catastrophic damage on the global economy.
Iran does not need to close the strait to win.
They simply need to wage a war of intimidation.
Let's explain the mechanics of a war of intimidation. We established that the global economy requires the smooth, uninterrupted flow of 17 million barrels of oil daily.
Yes.
The system operates on hyper-efficient, just-in-time delivery schedules. If the IRGC conducts a sporadic harassment campaign, perhaps a single unidentified mine damages a tanker, or a swarm of fast boats briefly engages a commercial vessel, or a suicide drone strikes an offshore loading facility, the physical flow of oil might only be paused for a few hours.
But the economic shockwave is instantaneous and profound.
How fast does it hit the market?
The moment a credible threat materializes in the shipping lanes, maritime insurance consortiums, like Lloyd's of London, drastically elevate premiums for vessels entering the war risk zone, or they refuse coverage entirely.
If supertankers cannot secure insurance, maritime conglomerates will refuse to sail them into the Gulf.
Exactly. The physical blockade is replaced by a financial blockade. The sudden restriction in supply causes global crude prices to spike violently.
And because of the indirect dependence we mapped out earlier, that price spike immediately impacts the manufacturing hubs of Asia.
The cost of producing consumer electronics, automotive parts, and basic goods surges.
Those costs are instantly passed down the supply chain, resulting in sharp inflationary shocks in the supermarkets and retail stores of North America and Europe.
A localized skirmish lasting 20 minutes in the Strait of Hormuz directly translates into a cost-of-living crisis across the Western Hemisphere.
The war of intimidation uses the extreme sensitivity of the global market as a weapon.
And we must conclude our analysis with the most volatile variable identified in the report, the human element.
The human element is always the wild card.
Theoretical models of deterrence and mutually assured destruction assume that all state actors will behave as rational, calculating bargainers.
But people aren't rational.
The text offers a stark historical warning. Crises are rarely managed with calm, peacetime logic. If a regime perceives an existential threat to its survival, or if a localized tactical incident like a misunderstood radio transmission or a warning shot that strikes a target spirals out of control, the rational models collapse.
In the claustrophobic confines of the strait, surrounded by a heavy density of rival military assets and profound ideological distrust, escalation can rapidly become an asymmetric reaction and eventually an end in itself. We have journeyed from the macro to the micro today. We started by defining the brutal geography of the 600-mile basin, focusing on that unforgiving 34-mile chokepoint and its claustrophobic 2-mile navigation lanes.
We quantified the staggering stakes: 57% of the world's crude reserves and the 17 million barrels flowing daily.
We tracked the massive eastward shift of that energy, explaining how the Asian manufacturing boom permanently tethers the entire global supply chain to the stability of the Gulf.
We mapped the historical fault lines, from the disputes over tactical fortress islands like Abu Musa to the subterranean tensions over the Qatar North Field.
All shattered by the bloody legacy of the tanker war and deep ideological divides. Finally, we dissected the brilliant, terrifying logic of asymmetric warfare, how a localized force uses geography, intelligence, and psychological ambiguity to hold the global economy at risk.
Knowing that the mere threat of chaos is as potent as a physical blockade.
So what does this all mean?
Synthesizing all of this data leaves us with a profound realization about the architecture of the modern world. We pride ourselves on building an advanced, technologically resilient global civilization.
We optimize supply chains with artificial intelligence and build communication networks that span the globe in milliseconds.
Yet this entire superstructure rests on a foundation that is breathtakingly fragile.
It really is.
If a localized miscalculation involving retrofitted fiberglass boats and aging sea-skimming missiles in a 34-mile channel can instantaneously trigger an economic crisis on the opposite side of the planet, then perhaps our ultimate vulnerability is not the military strength of any single nation.
What is it then?
Our true vulnerability is humanity's systemic reliance on hyper-optimized single points of failure. We have engineered a global order where the immovable forces of geography violently intersect with the unpredictable nature of human geopolitics, all confined within a space so small you could drive across it in an hour.
It fundamentally changes how you view the global economy. The next time you purchase a manufactured good, realize that its existence is tied to the delicate, invisible tensions beneath the waters of that rocky coastline. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it encourages you to look past the surface of the news, to question the hidden physical infrastructure that sustains your daily life, and to recognize the profound geographic choke points that quietly dictate global history. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we will see you on the next deep dive.